Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our study of the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are now in Children of Adam. This section, of course, is going to have as its central poem, I Sing the Body Electric. We now turn to section number 1. Now, our assumptions here are that you've been with me at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, you have found our playlist of Talks with Walt. You've worked from the inscriptions through starting from Pomanak to the 52 sections of Song of Myself. And then as well, you've already worked with me in the previous 2 poems of Children of Adam. And the intro lecture that I've given already for Sing the Body Electric. Check the description box to see the previous poem. I really do recommend that you kind of look at that to get some background knowledge, because there's a lot of that I'm just not going to cover at all. Now, in earlier lectures in Children of Adam, I've been coming back to passage 27 of Song of Myself. And I just want to, as we get ready to start Sing the Body Electric, which, hey you guys, I've said this many times in 303. If you're not a patriot, it isn't your fault. It's my fault and my generation's fault for not giving you the reasons to be patriotic. And I think that when we look at American history, we got to look at Walt Whitman, and we got to look at the courage that he had to write a section called Children of Adam and a poem like I Sing the Body Electric. But he's building on ancient traditions, and we're going to talk about Homer before we're done here, and the question of whether you're a body or you're a soul or a spirit or whatever it is you want to use that word. The Greeks lived the word psyche. But I love to start by looking at passage 27 of Song of Myself. Do you remember these lines? We've given full lecture on it already. To be in any form. What is that? Notice the rhetorical questioning that we'll get to in Body Electric 1. Round and round we go, all of us, and ever come back thither. If nothing lay more developed, the quehug in his callous shell were enough. Mine is no callous shell. I have instant conductors all over me, whether I pass or stop. They seize every object and lead it harmlessly through me. I merely stir, press, feel with my fingers, and am happy. To touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. Now, when we look at those lines and then we turn to the first section of I Sing the Body Electric, and we've already commented on the fact that the 1855 version of this is quite different from the 1867 version. We'll want to pay attention right away to the, as I call them, echoes. Again, I'll go back to comments that I made about how we read T.S. Eliot. We've argued in 303 that the great poet of the 20th century is in fact Yeats and W.B. Yeats and T.S. Eliot. Not to overlook Harold Bloom's argument that Wallace Stevens deserves to be in that category as well, no question. But when you look at T.S. Eliot, I believe you've got to pay attention to Whitman, and I think he was very influenced by Whitman, especially notice in that opening set of lines from Bert Norton, my words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose, disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we go? Quick, said the bird. Find them fighting around the corner through the first gate into our first world. That idea of the echoes, we're going to hear some of that here. For example, the great poem of Leaves of Grass is, of course, what? Well, yeah, Song of Myself. If it's not that, it's I Hear America Singing, maybe the most anthologized. Notice the opening line here, I Sing the Body Electric. Let's just read the poem in exegete, shall we? I sing the body electric. The armies of those I love engirth me, and I engirth them. They will not let me off till I go with them. Respond to them and discorrupt them and charge them full with the charge of the soul. Was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies conceal themselves? And if those who defile the living are as bad as they who defile the dead? And if the body does not do fully as much as the soul, and if the body were not the soul, what is the soul? Now, let's go ahead and get it out of the way right now. We said it in our very earliest lectures as we introduced ourselves to Whitman, that there's a lot of Whitmans. Whitman is poet, Whitman is person, Whitman is politician, Whitman is philosopher. He's very interested in the age-old question, which We have said many times in lectures in 303 begins with our study of Homer, no question, and Virgil. Of course, culminates in some ways with our study of Plato and Marcus Aurelius. It is the question, who are you? And of course you say, I'm this thing, this body. And yet there is this other thing that we say we are, our mind, our consciousness, soul, spirit. There has been this debate, as I said in my previous intro lecture, there has always been this previous debate about which one of those two matters more. Well, this is a tough question going back to Plato's Phaedo. We give a full lecture on it at learnstrong.net. Because as Socrates is about to drink the hemlock, and his students are just so unhappy, oh, sad, sad, right? Because he's about to die, he's giddy. He's ready to go on his next adventure. And of course, he'll make the argument in that dialogue that, well, there is a body, but there's this thing called your soul or your spirit. You have to have a mind to argue there is no mind. So it does beg the question, what is your soul? And that's what, in many ways, Body Electric will try to answer. And in section 1, he'll just lay out the groundwork. He says, I'm going to sing the Body Electric. By the way, put it in your notes. We've already said it. Whitman was very influenced by the new science, as he would have referred to it. And electricity is one of those elements of the new science. And so, very much like Mary Shelley and Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, as we've talked about elsewhere, this question of electricity is very interesting, and so here we're going to have it introduced right away. Electric, of course, is a fun word because it has multiple kind of connotations, doesn't it? Notice, the armies of those I love. By the way, it's interesting, in 55 he didn't use the word armies, but by 67 after the war, he's using this word armies. Why? Because all of American culture had been influenced by the idea of warfare. The armies of those I love. I told you he doesn't use love very often in Leaves of Grass. So when he uses it, set up and pay attention. The armies of those I love engirth me, and I engirth them. It's the only time the words engirth gets used in all of Leaves of Grass. It's a fascinating word because it has something to do with what you do when you put a saddle around a pony. So it's a powerful word picture of surrounding, right? Enfolding will often be his word. And this will immediately make us think, of course, of our study of Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. The Sea of Faith was once too at the full. And round her shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled, that girdling, that engirthing, that, you know, in other words, Whitman is saying, I am subsumed by everything, and everything subsumes me. Then he continues with this idea of the armies. They will not let me off. It's interesting phrasing. Till I go with them, respond to them. And again, this is Whitman, the great responder, the great communicator, the great listener, the great thinker, right? And what is his goal? Now, this is a key word. It's a strange word, discorrupt. Now, we know what the word corrupt means, to somehow change for the worse. So what does discorrupt mean? Whitman, as I have said to you, began as an educator. He always saw himself as an educator. Go back to our comments of Song of Myself, passage 46, 47. I will you to be a bold swimmer. He most honors my style. Who learns under it to destroy the teacher. Discorrupt means what? Well, yeah, to challenge, to save, to try to bring back to a former state in some way, to recover. Discorrupt them. And charge, notice electric, charge them full with the charge of the soul. In other words, the body, electric, is the soul, unified. Okay? And so we're going to see this all the way through the poem, I Sing the Body Electric. I'm just kind of setting you up for some of the things that we will be looking at now as we move forward. Then, go back to our reading of 27, Song of Myself. Did you hear that? A rhetorical question. Whitman loves to play the game of asking you, the reader, to engage with him, challenging you with questions. And so here we're going to play this. Where did he learn something like that? I think it was his study of Plato, and especially the teachings of Socrates, who loved to ask those questions. Remember how he loves to ask those questions in Republic? What is justice? What is wisdom? What is courage? What is virtue? We're playing a similar kind of game here. Notice the construction will remind you of several moments of starting from Paumanok and several moments of Song of Myself as well. Was it doubted, by the way, in the 55 version, it wasn't doubted, it was dreamed. It's interesting that he would change this. Was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies, by the way, in 55 it was live bodies, the word live was provided, their own bodies conceal themselves. Now here by corrupt, what he means is There are those who will, as we said in our intro lecture, following the path of St. Augustine and others as they read the Genesis 3 account of the eating of the forbidden fruit, and of course our Milton, that the body is this prison, right? The soul wants out, desperately wants out. And so the body needs to somehow be de-emphasized and the soul to be elevated and to be celebrated. Whitman's got a serious problem with this because he sees these two in more integral fashion as symbiotic, right? So he sees the soul and the body as somehow unified. So he'll ask this really interesting question: was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies conceal themselves? And then the next question. Although if you'll pay attention, these really aren't questions as much as they are talking points that he will obviously get throughout this poem. And if those who defile, that is to say, somehow denigrate the living, are as bad as those who defile the dead. In other words, we try not to defile the dead because we believe there needs to be some respect for the dead. But isn't that also true that we should show respect for the living, especially their bodies? I sing the body electric. And his final two questions, which will be yin and yang, as we've talked about it in those lectures on Taoism. And if the body does not do fully as much as the soul, the use of the word do is a fascinating word here. Do fully as much as the soul, question mark. And if the body were not the soul, what is the soul? Now, of course, we've seen this already in earlier discussions. Passage 48, A Song of Myself. I have said that the soul is not more than the body, and I have said that the body is not more than the soul, and nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. We've seen this already. Whitman has been making this argument all the way through Leaves of Grass, that there's this somehow unification between body and soul. Now, of course, we know about the dualism of Descartes, what we call Cartesian philosophy, and the debate about are you a body or are you a soul has been a very, very old kind of argument. For Whitman, though, he wants to bring these two together in profound ways. Now, the way he's going to do this is by playing around with two definitions of body. That is to say, individual physical body and body as in a group of people, let's just call them for the time being for Whitman, Americans. Okay? He'll also play around in two definitions of soul or spirit. On the one hand, soul can mean what we mean when we talk about I've got soul, I've got energy, electric, right? Electric. There's another rendering of soul as well. That is to say, consciousness, spirit, energy, as we have pointed out in other lectures. So he's going to dance back and forth between these definitions, and we're just going to marvel at the games that he plays. I said it to you guys before, if you will read Leaves of Grass closely, it will awaken all kinds of domains of learning for you. And that's exactly, of course, what Whitman wants you to do. In other words, sometimes doubting is not so bad, but there's some things you can't doubt. As Descartes pointed out, you can't doubt that you're doubting, right? That I think, therefore I am line from the great Cartesian philosophy, as we've spoken about it elsewhere. Okay, let's finish quickly at 2a. Well, obviously a message here is the unified view of the body and the soul as being integral. That is to say, our big five. This text, obviously, I sing the body electric, and even passage 1 here, will speak very much about epistemology and what we can know, ontology, who we are, obviously, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then finally the question of theodicy. Why is it that there's got to be pain and suffering in the world? We're going to hear all about those throughout this I Sing the Body Electric, all 9 sections of this poem. At 2b, just notice not what Whitman says, but how he says it. Notice the use of the rhetorical questions. And in some ways, I mean, if you go back and read these, they're not even really questions as much as they are challenges, right? Challenges. At 3a, and how we relate this to other texts, hey guys, think about it. Go back and look at our individual lectures of every book, of Homer's Iliad, Homer's Odyssey, Virgil's Aeneid. And what is it that we're constantly emphasizing in those great classics? Well, it's the question of who you are. Granted, you are this thing, this body, but you're something else, it seems, in the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid. And Whitman's definitely playing similar kinds of games. On the one hand, of course, we got the ancient classicists of Homer and Virgil and obviously Plato. And then on the other hand, we've got the Christian thinkers of Augustine and Dante and obviously our Milton, where we have this dualism, this constant fight between the two. For Whitman, he wants to collapse these. This is why we call him an integral thinker, right? He wants to collapse these in some powerful way. I as well want to point out that Whitman was very influenced by Emerson, and go back and look at our lecture on Emerson's Oversoul to start to get a sense of the game that Whitman is playing here. Finally, at 3b, in a way that you can own this first passage of I Sing the Body Electric. And again, my hope, just like I said in previous lectures, like when we started Palmanock and when we started Song of Myself, poems that have multiple sections, I hope that our study of passage 1 will lead you to go, man, I wonder what he says in passage 2 that can be even more challenging, demanding, discorrupting, if I can use the language of his poem. What is your view on this difference between body and soul? Do you think of soul as mind? Is that the same thing, or is that something different? Do you think of soul as consciousness? Is that something different for you? And how about this for a question? Can you have a mind without a brain? Good. And in some ways, we'll call what Whitman plays around with spiritual materialism. And as we come back now to passage number 2, we'll enjoy the ways in which he continues to challenge us. I hope that you're being challenged, right? Discorrupted. Thank you.